Hello friends, Ronbus has released a new paddle, the Pulsar FX. The Pulsar has been around for a while and was Ronbus's first thermoformed paddle. The Pulsar FX is an updated version of this, which includes a new carbon fiber grid placed between the core and the surface layers. This grid is marketed as providing more dwell time and increased power and spin. So how does this new lineup from Ronbus hold up to its claims? Let's dive in and break down all the performance metrics like spin, hand speed, control, power, and pop. We'll also open up one of these paddles and see what's happening with the grid. And we'll look at how everything comes together on the court during gameplay. The Ronbus Pulsar FX costs $180 and you can take 10% off with the code JOHNQ. Ronbus is offering 3 shapes for the FX series, the R1, R2, and R3. The R1 and R3 are the same elongated shapes offered in their previous Pulsar and Nova series, but this is the first time they've offered the R2 for one of their thermoformed paddles, and they updated the R2 shape. Before, it was a round-shaped, shorter paddle with a short handle, but they've changed that to a standard shape, almost identical to the Yola Scorpius. The static weight of all 3 shapes is close to 8 ounces, falling at 8.2 ounces for the R1 and R2 and 8.1 ounces for the R3. Swing weights are 121 and 122 for the elongated R1 and R3, and the R2 has a much reduced swing weight of 114. These swing weights are pretty standard for elongated and standard shape paddles, and the R1 and R3 will feel like swinging an R3 Nova, Bread and Butter Filth, Legacy Pro, and Electra Model E. And the R2 will feel like the Yola Scorpius Colin Johns Gen 2, 6.0 Double Black Diamond, Volair Mach 2 Forza, and Bread and Butter Loco. Twist weights are 6.21 for the R1 and R3 and 7.09 for the R2. The twist weight correlates with the width of the sweet spot from side to side on the paddle. Again, these are standard twist weights for these shapes, and given these twist weight numbers, the R1 and R3 will feel a little less stable than the R2 on off-center shots, and the R2 will be more forgiving. Like the first generation of Pulsars, the FX series is thermoformed, which involves a layup where everything is combined in a mold and the paddle is surrounded by edge foam encased in a carbon fiber seam, and the mold is closed up and exposed to heat and pressure to be cured. I wanted to check out what the new carbon fiber grid system looked like, so I cut one open and dissected it. You can see many similarities to the original Pulsar: the perimeter carbon fiber seam, edge foam, and 3 layers of unidirectional carbon fiber oriented at 90 degrees, forming the surface layers. Peeling up the carbon fiber layers on the surface revealed that the grid is placed between the polypropylene core and surface layers, separated by a white fabric-looking layer. So going from the surface down, we have 3 layers of unidirectional carbon fiber, then that cloth-looking layer, then the grid, then the honeycomb core. The grid might actually be fully encased in the white cloth, but it's hard to tell for sure. The grid is also made from unidirectional carbon fiber, so the same as what we see in the surface layers, and strips are laid out horizontally across the paddle face, spaced about an inch from each other. Given that the grid is made from the same material as the surface layers, I'm curious how it behaves differently, providing increased dwell time as advertising claims. The grid is separated from the face layers with that fabric-looking layer, and it's right up against the polypropylene core, so maybe its interaction with the core is different than the solid carbon fiber surface sheets. So let's put this to the test and see how the paddle performs. Another difference between the FX and the original Pulsar is that Ronbus switched to a new, more textured peel ply, which generates great spin. Spin ranged from 2177 RPM on the R2 to 2264 RPM for the R1. These are great numbers and fall within the top-tier spin category. These numbers are about 300 RPM above the original Pulsars and 500 RPM above the Nova series, so the FX series gets a significant boost in spin. To measure power, I recorded serve speed with a radar gun and took an average. My average serve speed for the elongated R1 and R3 was 56.3 and 55.6 miles per hour, falling at the 89th and 74th percentiles. And the R2 got 54.6 miles per hour, falling at the 49th percentile. These numbers are higher than the original Pulsars, which landed on the 53rd and 36th percentiles for the R1 and R3. The FX R2 power is more muted, but still above the original R3. For pop, I take the average speed of punch volleys, and this puts the R1 and R3 at the 87th and 86th percentiles, well above the original Pulsar series. And this is where the new R2 shape shines. It got a pop rating landing on the 89th percentile. So what these metrics mean in terms of gameplay is that the elongated R1 and R3 score relatively high for both power and pop, all up in the 70s and 80s for percentiles. And the R2 gets more muted power, but has the best pop. So there's a boost in the FX series for power and pop over the previous Ronbus paddles. This boost is biggest for pop, which translates into more offensive weapons during kitchen play with shorter strokes like punch volleys, counters, and flicks. The sweet spot on the R1 and R3 feels similar to the same shapes in the original Pulsar series and the Nova series. Since both of these paddles are elongated, the sweet spot is longer and more narrow, but overall it's large and comparable to other thermoformed paddles with the same shape. And the R2 has a very nice, oversized, wide sweet spot, very similar to the Gen 2 Yola Scorpius. The feel of these paddles when impacting the ball is stiffer than I anticipated. They're advertised as having more dwell time as a result of the carbon fiber grid overlay on the core, so I was expecting something that felt at least a little like the new Yola Gen 3s. But these FXs actually felt slightly stiffer to me than the original Pulsars and Novas. But to me, this makes sense because carbon fiber is much stiffer than the polypropylene found in the core. So if the grid is interacting with the core in any significant way, then it's likely to provide more stiffness and less flex. Regardless, the results don't lie, and the Pulsar FX paddles do get more power and pop than their predecessors. So whether or not this is actually a result of more dwell time or adding another layer of carbon fiber to the layup to stiffen the face is up for debate. To me, the power difference is subtle, but the increased pop is where these paddles shine over the original Pulsars and Novas. Given the extra pop, there's more danger of popping up balls, so control can be an issue if you're dialed into more muted paddles. The enhanced spin on these paddles does help a bit with control because with top spin, you can get the ball to dip more. Out of these three shapes, the R2 is my favorite. It has the largest sweet spot, best maneuverability, and best pop. I'm glad that Ronbus introduced this shape, and I think it'll be their most popular offering. So to wrap this up, the new core grid system on the Pulsar FX series is not a complete game-changing technology for Ronbus, but these paddles are better than their previous lineup if you value more spin and pop. Plus, adding the R2 shape was a smart move, and I think this paddle will serve most players well. Although these new paddles have a boost in power and pop over Ronbus's previous lineup, don't expect Yola Gen 3 or Gearbox levels of power. There's a significant difference when you played with these paddles side by side. But the Pulsar FXs are in the upper range for power and pop in the current thermoformed paddle market, so if you're looking for something between the more muted Gen 2 paddles and the current Gen 3 floating core paddles, then this could be a good option. If this paddle is for you, you can take $18 off using the code JohnQ, bringing the price down to $162. And that's a wrap. As always, thank you for watching, and I hope you got something useful out of this video. I'll see you in the next one.